Hello and welcome to another painting video. In this video, I'll be painting my first warband for Trench Crusade. This exciting new game had an insanely successful Kickstarter and I managed to jump in at the last second. Of course, my first warband had to be the Black Grail, as these models take the concept of Grimdark to the next level. This tutorial will cover the standard warband, while the reinforcements will get their own videos. Those miniatures are incredibly intricate. Without further ado, let's begin, shall we? I start by laying down the base coats with the airbrush. After priming the models black, I spray all of them with Rakarth Flesh, except for the Plague Knight, who I'm keeping primed black for now. Next, I spray a zenithal highlight of Palace Witch Flesh on all the models. I spray at an angle so only the top parts of the models are hit. I then create a series of undersprays, which are the opposite of a zenithal. From below, I spray Dark Oath Flesh. This is a contrast paint that filters nicely over the lighter undercoat. For the models with more severe mutations and open wounds, I spray Berserker Bloodshade. This will serve as a base for irritated and infected skin. The Corpse Guard gets an underspray of Mortarian Grime. This adds variety to the diseased skin and helps them stand out among the thralls. Finally, I add an underspray of Targor Raid Shade to all models to enhance the shading on the exposed skin. A mottling effect is a great way to add more texture to the skin. To achieve this, I use an old large dry brush with some Druchii Violet. Be sure not to overload the brush with paint. Then, using a bent paper clip, I flick the brush to create a splatter effect on the model. I repeat this process with Akhelian Green shade. This creates a mottled appearance on the skin that will shine through in certain areas as I continue painting. This gives the effect of a layered, multi-tonal skin on these ghastly models. I grab my airbrush again and apply an overspray or zenithal of Berserker Bloodshade over all the wounds, mutations and torn skin. Next, I do the same with Akhelian Green shade, but I focus more on the normal parts of the skin. This helps give the skin a pale, sickly appearance. For the most severe wounds and gashes, I add Druchii Violet for extra depth. Then I dry brush a mix of Rakarth Flesh and Palace Witch Flesh over the skin. And with that, the diseased skin is done for now. I'll come back to it later with some finishing touches, but for now let's focus on some other areas. All exposed gore gets a base coat of Screamer Pink. Next, I apply a layer of red gray, which gives the gore a nicely discolored look. I highlight it with a mix of red gray and ice yellow. To shade the gore, I use Carroburg Crimson, followed by another shade of Carroburg Crimson mixed with Nuln Oil applied to the deepest recesses. For all exposed bones and skulls, I start with a base coat of Screaming Skull. Then I shade them with Skeleton Horde contrast paint. Finally, I highlight the bones with Screaming Skull. Not all models are walking around naked. The pants and robes are base coated with a Dark Reaper. I then shade them with a watered down Black Templar. Next, I layer Dark Reaper onto the areas that would be hit by light. For a subtle highlight, I use Thunderhawk Blue on select areas. I keep it minimal to avoid making the cloth look too bright. Any leather bits are base coated with leather brown, shaded with Agrax Earth shade, and highlighted with a mix of leather brown and light earth. I absolutely love the thrall with the huge fly bursting out of him. I also added some smaller fly companions to the other models. All of these are base coated with a mix of Black Templar, Akhelian Green, and Contrast Medium. I highlight the flies with Gauss Blaster Green. And I follow this up with another highlight using Gauss Blaster Green mixed with white. The eyes are base coated with Corn Red. Next, I layer Evil Sun Scarlet onto the top parts of the eyes. For the final touch, I highlight the eyes with a weathering effect using Wild Rider Red. The wings on the smaller fly companions are painted with Aethermatic Blue. The Plague Knight is my favorite model of this warband. Elegant, yet deeply disturbing. I start by dry brushing his armor with rough iron from the army painter. Next, I apply another dry brush of gunmetal. And I follow this up with another dry brush of Canoptek Alloy. For the final metal layer, I dry brush with a mix of Canoptek Alloy and Runefang Steel to give the armor a cold metallic finish. I shade the armor with Athonian Camoshade, which filters the cold metal with a dirty green sheen. In the deepest recesses, where the shadows are darkest, I add Akhelian Green shade to emphasize the depth. To finish, I apply a final dry brush of Tainted Gold, also from the army painter. This adds a golden sheen to the highlights, which pairs beautifully with the dirty green armor. Yes, you've read that right, we're painting flesh robes, as Beelzebub intended. I start by base coating the flesh robes with Screamer Pink. Next, I layer on a mix of Rekarth flesh and Kislev flesh, which creates a lovely pallid sickly tone. I highlight the skin using a mix of Rekarth flesh, Kislev flesh, and a touch of ice yellow for added depth. The flesh robes are shaded with Carroburg Crimson mixed with Lamia Medium to thin the shade. For the ripped areas, I use a mix of Nuln Oil, Carroburg Crimson and Lamia Medium to give them a more infected look. With Druchii Violet, I paint on some veins. Now it can be tricky to get the right amount of paint on your brush. Too much and you draw thick lines, too little and it won't even show up. Experiment until you find the balance, as adding veins really enhances the ghastly appearance of these robes. All metal that I want to appear rusty is roughly painted with Scrag Brown. Next, I add Ryza Rust in the same rough pattern to create a base for the rust effect. Well, this already looks pretty good, but I enhance it even further by layering dirty down rust on top. To finish, I go over all the rust with a damp brush to bring back some of the metallic shine and diffuse the effect in areas where it is too heavy. Now it's time to add the finishing touches to the skin, as I really want it to look sickly and gross. I mix enamel washes from Villainy Inks, combining Akhelian Green, Decay of Death and some White Spirit. I apply this mixture to all the skin. I then remove the excess with a cotton bud, First without White Spirit and then with it. Next, I do the same with Villainy Ink's Carrion Crimson, applying it to all the wounds and gashes. Again, I remove the excess with some White Spirit and a cotton bud. Some models have boils, which I paint with Lamenter's Yellow. I only add a couple of them to create a little bit of variation on the diseased skin. Now the next step is very subtle, but it adds more texture to the model. Using a detail brush, I paint little lines of Ratlin grime around the wounds, gashes and sores. This gives the effect of dark ichor or blood running from these spots. Next, I mix the oil paints Coagulated Blood and Burnt Umber. I add small amounts of these paints to White Spirit to create a workable consistency, and I then apply the mixture to all the open wounds. Finally, just like the enamel washes, I remove the excess with a cotton bud and White Spirit. These steps really bring out the gross, diseased skin on these fantastic models. This is how I paint my trench bases for the Black Grail. I start by adding a small layer of Sterling mud to the base. Since I already applied texture paste before priming, not much is needed here. The maggots and skulls are painted with Rakarth flesh. The duck boards are painted with Steel Legion drab. Next, I shade the entire base with Athonian Camoshade to give it a filthy, grimy look. I highlight the mud with Baneblade Brown. Finally, I highlight the maggots and skulls with a mix of Rakarth flesh and Palacewish flesh. I start by ensuring the smoke plumes are black. Then I layer Tenebrous Grey on the upper areas of the smoke. Next, I layer a mix of Tenebrous Grey and Red Grey. I add more Red Grey to the previous mix and layer again, making sure each subsequent layer gets smaller and smaller. I finish with a highlight of pure Red Grey. For the highlighted areas inside the smoke, I paint dark ivory. I focus on the opposite sides of the already highlighted areas. Finally, I shade the smoke with turquoise fluorescent from Green Stuff Worlds to give it a sickly look. For the final touches on the base, I add Ard Coat to the mud to make it look wet and grimy. And finally, I paint the rim of the base with Corvus Black. And here we have the Black Grail, ready to fight in the name of Beelzebub and spread his diseases. I really enjoyed painting this warband. I tried to make it look different from my usual Nurgle or Death Guard tutorials, and I think I succeeded here. I'm looking forward to painting the rest of this warband, and I certainly have more warbands ready to be primed. In the meantime, be sure to follow me on Instagram, where I share behind the scenes pictures and updates on my current projects. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks for watching.